Hi there, this is Dan from onlinebasscourses.com. Hope you're doing well. This is an exclusive video for Making Music magazine, and what I'm going to show you is 5 really important scales and connect them to 5 very common feels that you hear in music, so that by the end of this video hopefully you've got loads of ideas to create your own bass lines and fills. So I'm going to start off with the 8th note feel. So here are quarter notes: 1, 2, 3, 4. 8th notes are 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and think rock bass lines like Mr. Brightside, a really driving rock thing. Not as easy as you think. You must try to keep bang in time. Don't speed up, don't slow down, and don't get any fluctuations in volume. So if you're plucking with your index and middle fingers, or going with a plectrum down and up, make sure you're really consistent with this. The scale I'm going to use for this example is the A major scale. Now this pattern here is just a movable one, so it means that the first note, your second finger's on that red blob, you can move that to anywhere on the E and the A string and you'll get that particular scale. But if you're on the 5th fret of the E string, it's A major. Actually, if you take away the 4th and the 7th notes, you're left with a major pentatonic scale, which is a really, really great one for bass lines and for fills. So I'm probably going to use that if I do fills. I've got a bunch of different drum loops that I want you to download because you can practice all of these ideas along to them. I'll kick on this one. This is the 8th note one. I'll play around with this major scale and I'll explain what I'm doing. Right, all I was doing was that scale, 1 bar or measure of the A, the first note. Then I was going to the 5th note. Now a guitarist or a keyboard player will play the chords based around these notes, whereas you'll play the root notes more often than not. You can play triads and arpeggios, but I'll get on to that. Take the notes of the scale, you might notice there, the 6th note, I was just moving to the 9th fret of the A string there. And indeed, there are lots of different ways to play the same pattern on a bass guitar, so the shape I gave you, you should definitely learn, then you could just strive to move it around to break out of that pattern. That really is a good way of getting yourself out of ruts or getting yourself out of playing the same thing on a bass. So I'm just going. That time I went from the 1st note to the 5th to the 4th. That'd be a 1-5-4 chord progression. That's 1 bar. That's another bar. And there I did 2 bars. Really trying to keep a consistency. I'm attacking it a little bit more with my right hand, with the plucking hand fingers, just to get a bit more of an attack, a bit more of a rocky driving feel going on. And a really good way to add a fill is just at the end of the phrase, so 4 bars. Let me show you that pattern very quickly. This is the major pentatonic scale. So I'm going 5th fret, 7th fret on the E string, and then 4, 7 on the A and the D strings. That's with fingers 2, 4, and then 1, 4, then 1, 4. And then frets 4 to 6 on the G string with fingers 1 and 3. That's a really good shape for the major pentatonic scale in this particular pattern, in this particular zone of the bass that we happen to be in. I like to break out of that pattern because then you can add slides and hammer-ons and techniques like that that sound really good. Let's move on to 16th notes. So we had 8th notes going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and so with a 2 in every beat. And now we've got 16th notes where you find that there are 4 in every beat. So You can count them like this. You can go 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a... And with this, it lends itself really well to funk. It's just a bit more movement, a bit more excitement into the playing. The drum that I've got here has got a bit of a shaker going on as well, so you can hear the subdivision of the beats. You can hear those 16th notes going past. The scale I want you to use for this one, although you'll notice that once you have the scales I'm going to show you for this entire lesson, you can mix styles up. That's absolutely no problem. You should do that. But I'm going to stay on the A, and this time I'm going to do a natural minor scale. Got a darker quality to it than the major. So I'm just going fingers 1, 3, 4 on frets 5, 7, 8 on both the E and the A strings. And then fingers 1 and 3 on 5 and 7 of the D. You know, even if you just play a scale like that up or down with some rhythm into it, you can hear riffs and bass lines coming out of that. All it really takes is an interesting phrase, notes from the scale plus a rhythm, and you've got a great bass line. So I'm going to click on this bass track now, the drum track, sorry, with the 16th notes, and I'm going to make up a disco kind of beat, kind of line that fits a bit more to this drum track. So it's just the injection of those 16th notes that adds a bit more excitement, a bit more movement into it. Those are 16th notes. And just like we had a major pentatonic, we had a pentatonic for the major scale, we've got one for the minor scale, the minor pentatonic. You may know this one. So we're going 5/8, frets 5/8 on the E string, and then 5/7 on the A and the D. You can add it on the G string as well to get more notes. Now, as I'm playing any of these examples, I've got the drum beats, so I know roughly what they sound like, and I've got the constraint of the scale. Other than that, I am making these up as I go. And I do that a lot because I've played lots and lots of sessions, and I've got to come up with bass lines quickly. And you can do exactly the same thing. If you understand where the notes of the scale are, and you're pretty good with your rhythms, and so you know where the beats are, and in this case we've got 16th. That's going on in my head all the time. Returning to this home base of this, in this case the 5th fret, the A. Otherwise, fairly randomly, I mean, I guess it's not random because I really know the sound that these notes are going to create before I play them. So I can use my ear to guide where my fingers go. And I think that way round is better than being guided only by a pattern that you know. So these are patterns, and the bass is a fantastic instrument to learn patterns. Always learn the sound that the patterns create. So and in my head, I've got the beats, I've got my foot tapping, I've got the 16th note feel. I really love that feel because I'm a big fan of funk music, and depending on what styles you really like, you might gravitate to one style more than another. Let's move on to the Dorian mode with a jazz swing feel. Now before we had quarter notes going 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's divide them up into triplets. So like 1 triplet, 2 triplet, that's 3 in every beat. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. That's one way to count them. If you get rid of the middle of the triplets, you get 1 we get this swing feel. That's where the jazz swing feel comes from. And a walking bass line is all to do with playing on every beat, every quarter note that you have in the bar, and then you can inject some rhythm and movement using that triplet feel. You can use every triplet one triplet there, or you can use to do little skips. So I'm just going to show you the Dorian mode. Again, plenty of ways that you can play this. This is the shape that I'm going for here. We're going to start, I'll do everything on A, okay, just for this lesson. Remember, you can move these shapes any way you like. So I'm going to go second finger on the 5th fret of the E string, that's A. And you've got second finger on the 5th fret, little finger on the 7th fret. Now a bit of a stretch across now. You can move back, shift across a little bit down to the 3rd fret of the A string. Then come back to where you were, slide across a bit more. Second finger, little finger on the 5th and 7th of the A string, so far. Then frets 4, 5, 7 on the D string. It's the Dorian mode. You may have heard it before. Good Times by Chic. That is just literally going up the Dorian scale. It's a very, very funky sound. Very good for, you know, get that 16th note feel and play around with this, and it sounds excellent for that. But we're going to use it in a walking kind of way, a bit like So What by Miles Davis. That's got the Dorian mode all over it. Let me play along to the drums and then I'll explain. So all I was doing there really was just playing the scale and sticking to quarter notes. I wasn't doing any of the swing business that I was explaining. And when you're doing walking bass lines, often that's what it means. You're getting a walking feel by playing on all the quarter notes. You may have noticed I started on the octave, on the 7th fret of the D string, and I just descended the scale. But at that point there, the 7th fret of the E string, I did a fret below that to chromatically move to the root note when I can land on the beat. If I didn't do that, I'd arrive at that A little bit too early. So that's a good thing you can do. And bang on that beat 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, bang. And then I just added a few little skips and rhythmic embellishments by using that triplet swing feel. You wouldn't do it on every beat. It's just a bit too much. But if you know that the underlying feel is triplets, you can add that in. And it just, Ray Brown was the master of that. Just adding little skips and rhythmic interest into his lines. If you visualize where the notes are, you'll see that some notes have gaps between them, and you can fill in those gaps chromatically, lead to other notes. And that tends to sound really jazzy, for want of a better word. You'll notice there, that was just the first 3 notes, and I was playing them this way, frets 5, 7, and 8 instead of that way. You just do that exact pattern, 5, 7, 8, up the octave. And that's a good way of starting to break out of shapes like the ones I've given you. You know, by all means, learn it that way, but then ask yourself, how can I play the first 3 notes in a different position? And just go up the octave. It's a really good way just to break out of patterns. Let's look at a Mixolydian mode now. This is a really, really common one used in blues, but for this example, I'm actually going to use reggae. It looks exactly the same as the A major scale that we played at the beginning, except we have a flattened 7th instead of a major 7th. That's just a good way of remembering a Mixolydian scale. If you start off with a major scale and natural minor, those are very, very common scales. Then you can say, okay, that one's exactly like that scale, but one note's different. So this is a good little memory aid. You know, you've heard that, but I'm not going to use it in that way. I'm going to use major triads in a reggae feel. So a triad is just when you play the first, third, and fifth notes of a scale. So the first note is the lowest note. Count up 3 from there to find the third note, and count 5 from the beginning to find the fifth. And that's a major triad, okay? Now this time, rather than stay on one chord, I'm going to move it, otherwise it gets a bit boring. Music is comprised of chords, so we're going to do that here. Good news is that we can use that exact same pattern using fingers 2, 1, and 4 to move around to the different shapes. I'm not going to get too much into the theory. All I'm going to tell you is that I'm moving from the 5th fret of the E string, which is A, dropping down to the 5th fret of the A string, which is D. It's a D major triad. And then shifting my hand to the 3rd fret of the E string, which is a G, to get a G major triad. So I've got 3 chords. I've got an A, a D, and a G. I could even go the G an octave higher. You do not have to use each of the notes within those triads, the first, third, and fifth. You can just use roots and thirds. In reggae, space is your friend, so don't overplay. You can add fills using the scale, the Mixolydian. Again, that probably is too busy, but I'm just going to have some fun with this. I'm going to put the backing track on for this and just play around with just the A triad, the D triad, and the G triad. I was trying my best to just leave as much space as I could there. And space is a key to bass lines. It's not the notes, always the notes you play, it's the gaps you leave as well. Now, obviously here, I'm just playing along to drum beats. I'm demonstrating. I'm not really thinking too much about these bass lines. When you craft something, whether it's with your band or you put a few loops together or played a few instruments together, at that point there, you can decide how your line is going to interplay with the other instruments. And that's another part of listening. You've really got to listen out and decide, where your bass fill's going to go, if at all. Listen to Sting when he played with the Police. He hardly did any bass fills at all, and there's a reason for that. He's a songwriter, and everything he was writing around it needed to feature. So just because you're going to know what to do after this doesn't mean you have to overplay. So use some taste. We're going to finish off with one of my favourite scales, the blues scale, minor blues scale. Really fun. It's used in so many different styles of music, and any one of these scales can be transferred to different styles, and not just the 5 that I'm showing you in this lesson. So really do mix and match them up. This is used loads in rock. It's just the minor pentatonic scale with the addition of a flat 5. So we're just going to do a minor blues, and I'm going to move the root note, that exact pattern. I'm going to move it from the A on the 5th fret to the 4 chord, which is the D minor on the 5th fret of the A string. Shift that across, 7th fret of the A string, we got E minor. So that's the 1, 4, 5. And I don't have to use every single note within that minor pentatonic scale, the blues scale. In fact, usually or often when you're playing a bass line. Something like that. I've just got root, fifth, flat seventh or minor seventh, and octave. That's a 5th fret E string, 7th fret A string, 5th fret D string, 7th fret of the D string. So the feel of this is really important. It's just a real classic blues shuffle. So here are the course notes: 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little bit like the jazz thing. We got da 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 da. Instead of straight eighths, the distinction between these two is really important. Straight eighths are 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and in shuffle or swing you get the second of the eighth is slightly later. So it's da 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 da, because the underlying thing again, we've got triplets. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. If you think about it like that, actually, 1 2 3 1 2 3. Get rid of the 2. You've got 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and that's what's happening. It's almost as if the middle of those triplets disappeared, and you're left with this swing or shuffle rhythm. Always tap your foot as you're playing, and have all of these feels locked in so that you don't have to think about it. And you may have to think about it when you're starting. And if any of this is new to you, you will have to sit down and figure it out until you don't. And that's the same with anything. It's the same with any shape, any pattern, anything new you're learning. You sit down and learn it until, and this obviously is consistent practice, once you get that down, you'll start to internalize these things. So I was really sticking to very simple roots, fifths, flats, flat sevenths, and octaves. Anything fancy there was just adding in some of that blues scale, and then moving to the different notes and just really sticking to that da 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 ba ba ba, adding some triplets in there to add some rhythmic interest as we were going there. So there you have it, 5 really common scales with 5 feels. What I recommend that you do is you visit the website, you download the PDF so you can get all those shapes. Remember that even as I was playing there, I was trying to keep things simple, but I just wanted to break out of the patterns, and you must do that too. Your bass neck goes from there to here. It's not just the little box pattern that you have there. So as soon as you can, break out of that pattern. So you give yourself way more note choices. Make sure you do that. Also download all the drum beats. They go around for a few minutes so you can just practice making up your own bass lines. And don't forget, you can take each of those 5 scales and apply it to any one of those drum beat, of those feels, okay? I hope you get something from this. I hope you can use a lot of that in existing songs to make up your own things, listen to songs and maybe pick it up a little bit easier. If you do have any questions whatsoever, do let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you. Other than that, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.